This is a production of Cornell University.
Speaking of 10 a.m., it is 10 a.m. I guess we'll get started. For everybody, I'm Carl Scamenti. I'm the program manager here at our Cornell Turfgrass program. Also do some extension work as well. I'll be here moderating most weeks. As you can see on the webinars, our schedule for this Thursday sports session, we're going to do this every other Thursday. So the next one I think is April 9th at 10 a.m. Just a couple logistics here. So there's a chat function on the right. I'll be posting any links that while Frank's presenting today that might be relevant. I'll be posting those online links there so you can find that. There's also a Q&A function. So if you ever have questions, that's the place to ask your question. It allows us to see them and mark them if they're answered or not. We'll record the webinars, as I said, and then just a brief comment on the format. So we're going to try and keep this quick every week, 15 to 20 minutes. We'll have a topic we want to focus on this week, obviously, with the situation with the COVID-19 virus, and thinking about the essentiality of turf is what Frank's going to talk about. We'll try and keep that to 15 to 20 minutes. And then, of course, we want to answer the questions you guys have. So again, that Q&A function is where you'll find that. So without further ado, Frank, I'm going to hand it off to you and we'll get started.
Great. Thanks, Carl. You can hear me okay?
Yep. I'm clear.
Great. Well, good to see everybody. And I'm so sorry to be standing in front of you with a Yankee hat and with a Yankee backdrop and not be talking to you about opening day and spring at baseball. And for those of us that are sports enthusiasts, and especially like me, a rabid Yankee fan, it's another, it adds insult to injury, all the things that we're sacrificing. But remember, these kinds of things that we're sacrificing are, the kinds of things that make life so enjoyable. But what matters most is that we're all here. And ultimately, my goal today is to talk to you about supporting each other during these difficult times. Obviously, this is not what we're used to. You got the slides there, Carl? You can see it? Okay, so we're just titling it Supporting Each Other Through These Difficult Times. It seems my shirt has mowing patterns on it too. Isn't that kind of cool? All these funny things that happen. So I'm hoping that we can shed some light on some things where there might be a lot of confusion. We did this with the golf guys yesterday, the golf folks yesterday, and it went 45 minutes. So, we're here certainly for 45 minutes, easily an hour if you really need it. But we're trying to approach this in a much different way than we have other kinds of things like this in the past. Obviously, I'd be around in the spring seeing many of you in person. So we're trying to replicate that and try to make this as interactive as possible. So I'm going to get through some of the content I want to share with you, my thoughts on the matter, and then happy to take questions for as long as you guys got them. So, this is what we're starting with, right? Everybody's got to keep each other safe. The numbers and things that we're seeing are certainly alarming, especially for us here in New York. So I just want to stress to everybody the importance from your land-grant institution to keep yourself safe. Just to remind you, Cornell University has shuttered about $10 million of agricultural research this spring. We are really shuttering this place down. And of course, we have the luxury in many ways to do that. It is a big sacrifice. Just want to reiterate the sacrifices everyone's making, economic and personally, for the health of others. So with that, Cornell Cooperative Extension maintains an Extension Disaster Network webpage that addresses these issues from a broader perspective, but certainly updates and safety issues that address food, agriculture, and horticulture. And of course, we're going to fall into the horticultural component of this. If you are deemed essential, now I have to say, it's not clear to me. I couldn't find anything that was saying whether municipalities and school districts, certainly school districts are closed. And I know a lot of us here are on minimum maintenance plans. So it's hard to know some of the answers to this thing. So one of the things that we heard in our conference call this morning with our regional representatives that help us put Shortcut together is, can I work? If I do, what do I do? What should I do to keep everybody safe? And then what's allowed, right? And so fundamentally, safety first, right? This is our mantra, but if that's what we're saying, there are best management practices for this, right? If you are going to work, if it's been deemed that the things you need to do for your sports fields, specifically your sports fields. We're going to have another webinar tomorrow for lawn and landscape and grounds, but specifically for people who have round ball sports or spring sports, particularly baseball, that would be happening now, and the maintenance of those things. If you're still doing that, we want you to be aware of best management practices under these conditions. Now, a lot of organizations are putting these out. There's probably very specific ones that even your facility might have and already adopted that they're asking you to weigh in on. I like the work Tom Ford did here at Penn State University to just give you an outline of the kinds of variables that are involved. Tom really writes in very plain English about the challenges we have about lunchrooms, about the way we generally send out crews to work. You know, we're talking about staggering crews. If somebody gets infected, what happens then? So obviously there are some very critical issues that we have to face if we are going to work. If we are going to work. So that's the first place to start for me as a extension turf specialist. I'm not a pandemic expert. I'm not a health expert. I have to rely on people who are translating health information and getting it to you. I can't answer specific questions about these sorts of things. I think I would refer you to the places where you can get more specific information about districts and municipalities and what your baseball or football club might be doing. But this is what I can tell you is a good resource from our perspective, where it understands how we work, right? There's a way we work in the sports turf industry that is worth you reviewing this before you move forward. All right. Now, here's my goal for you today. If you're going to work, everybody's going to say, well, what's the minimum amount you got to do? We don't want you out here. We want you to go and go home, right? Everybody needs to be home. And that question is very much dependent on, well, are they going to play on these fields? A lot of these sports are not allowed to be done. There's all kinds of regulations about the kinds of sports that are allowable, and generally team sports where there's crowding or going to be any physical contact, like in soccer or in baseball when you're sliding and doing things. I mean, obviously a catch might be okay, but who's touching the ball? So if you are getting traffic, active traffic on your fields, you might have to, well, minimum maintenance means I got to get this thing ready for play, and here's what I do for that. But if you don't have traffic, now you step back and you say, well, who's out there? Well, people are out there passively trafficking the place, but there's no focused traffic, and I'm not going to prepare to skin, because we're telling them not to play. And if they come out, they're at risk. Oh, what about risk? Listen, there's a lot of questions here we don't have answers to. There's a lot of questions I can't answer. How much risk are you at if you don't prepare the field and people go use it under a banned activity? You got to put signs up. These are questions I actually cannot answer yet. Not a lot of people can. That's one of the problems. So it's hard to have confidence, 100% confidence in all your decisions. But from how do I do this work? If you get traffic or don't get traffic, that's what's going to govern a lot of this. Oops, sorry. So let me give you 3 simple rules. First, do no harm. Whatever you're going to do, a minimum maintenance plan should not be trying to do things too early. We're hearing that people want to put insecticides out, right? Because I may not be able to get my grub control down. Well, you start doing that now, you could be impacting beneficials in a very serious way. And if you're not mowing as much and things are in flower and you put an insecticide, in fact, if you put anything out and your turf is in flower because you're not mowing it, you run the risk of damaging beneficial insects. And we know how everybody feels about pollinators these days. So first, do no harm. Don't rush to do anything. Second, avoid that reflex reaction. Just because you've always done it, that's like the one that's going to take us down the toilet here, right? Just because you've always done it doesn't mean you're doing it now, especially if you don't have traffic, right? So, and then you've got to start thinking about strategic reductions. Can I start and keep care minimal? And my answer is yes, right? There's a very simple, very strategic way to approach this. So let's go through some of the basics. First off, the forecasts are sort of suggesting we're going to warm up. There's going to be a stall, but certainly we're well ahead of normal. We may get a little bit of a stall in the growing season, but we're way ahead of normal. We're expecting very warm conditions coming forward. And that is generally as the growing season is going to progress. Now, in sports turf and in turf in general, we're so intimately associated with soil temperature, right? That we should make sure you're paying attention to this. If you have a way of monitoring your soil temperature, and this is from our Turfgrass Forecast website, Carl's going to put all the links to all the things we're talking about are going to go on the chat here, and we'll be pushing them out, and you'll be able to, people who are watching this recorded, all those links will be available to you. This is a good place to start. Keep in mind, roots are going to be growing. Soils are releasing nutrients, just no top growth yet, right? So keep an eye on soil temperatures. I'm not really worried about this until we're getting into the low to mid 50s. And even down in Maryland, in DC, you're barely into the upper 40s yet. Now, this could change rapidly, but with moisture coming, it may stay still very cool. Now, the long-term outlook, and again, if you're thinking about firing up an irrigation system, really the only people that should be remotely considering it are sand-based people. But if you look at the rainfall forecast here, the prediction that came out just on March 19th is saying we're expecting above normal precipitation. We've got a better chance of above normal precipitation in the Northeast. So again, not sure we need to get out there and rush any water going. This is probably the single most important thing that everybody's talking about. And I had a number of wonderful conversations yesterday. You know, when you get into golf and they start applying PGRs and start thinking about that on a regular basis as a routine practice, they think about growth very different. Now, if you're using plant growth regulators, I'd encourage you to listen to the recording we did yesterday about golf turf because that's a very elaborate discussion. Now, for the purposes of this, I would tell you, unless you've got high performance athletic fields, you ought to be raised, and you know, they're not getting used all the time. If you're normally mowing your bluegrass at about an inch and a half, right? I don't see any reason why you can't go to 2 inches, right? So I'm really thinking in northern climates, 2 inches is a bare minimum height. I think most of you ought to be able to get to the 3 to 4 inch range, especially if you're not actively using the fields. Right? I'm not suggesting a baseball infield should be let go to 4 inches, but certainly 2.5, 3 inches is perfectly reasonable. Now, why do that? Well, you do that because we know if you follow the 1/3 rule, if you don't remove more than 30% of the foliage at any one time, you actually suppress the growth rate. Mowing grass just to remove about 30% minimizes the amount of mowing and minimizes growth over the long term. So the only effective way to really reduce mowing and keep growth slow is by following the 1/3 rule and by raising the height of cut. You do a significant amount to letting the grass, having to go out there to mow less. Obviously, if you can get the height all the way to 4 inches, which is what I'm going to tell my lawn and landscape people tomorrow, you can let it go to 6. Now, people are going to say, well, that doesn't look like it normally does. And then you say, well, I don't know. Have you noticed there's a pandemic that maybe we can't get out here so much? So we're trying to be mindful of this. And I think these are the kinds of conversations we have to have with people moving forward. They're not easy. But we're trying to give you some science for, listen, I'm trying to be out as little as possible. Here's the easiest way to do it. Let me raise the height of cut. All right. Now, this is a solitary activity that can be useful early in the season on sport field. I don't believe it's minimum maintenance, but it's something if you want to get some work done, make sure you're sanitizing all your surfaces if you're going out to do it, because it can help with a lot of factors. I wouldn't recommend it as a routine practice during this time because it's really only something you need when you're actively playing on the field. So generally, mowing, I would tell you, don't rush. Check growth, raise your height, mow 30%, roll is a question mark. And if you're able, as time passes, consider plant growth regulators, and we'll get into that more as the grass gets growing. And if we're not able to get out there and you're allowed to use plant growth regulators, go ahead and do it. Now, one last question before I leave mowing and growth and soil temperatures and things like that. You notice I'm not talking about nutrients. I'm not talking about fertilization because I don't think you should be fertilizing. I can't think of a reason. I couldn't come up with a reason yesterday with really smart people who were telling me, yeah, northern climates, nah, you got time. You got time, especially if there's no traffic. A lot of times, the only reason you need traffic is to recover from some damage that's there or to keep up with traffic. Neither one of those things are going to matter dramatically right now, especially if the fields aren't being used. So, the story on fertilizer is if people are telling you to rush out there and get your products down, number one, before April 1st, it's against the law. I don't want to remind everybody it's against the law. Second, if why do you want to be stimulating growth when you might not be able to deal with it later on? All right, how about pests? 3 big ones: crabgrass, red thread, and the grubs. Oh, sorry about that. Crabgrass, red thread, and the grubs. So these are the kinds of things you should be thinking about. But again, we're too early. We're too early. There's nothing here for you to do yet, right? Spend some time, learn how to ID the weeds. The winter annuals should be flowering now. Henbit, chickweeds, annual bluegrass be flowering soon. A lot of good time to do some weed ID. Jenny Gown-Niffen and our weed extension service has done a great job in putting together this weed ID. Get out there and start identifying plants. Take your kids out. Teach them how to identify plants. Kyle Wickings, our soil insect ecologist, put together a spectacular grub ID. I love how it gives you the size of the grub. And if you're thinking about what you're going to see now, you see the bottom right-hand corner where you can't see the penny? That's probably the size of the monsters you're going to be seeing out there now. Now's a good time to go out there and look. If you're walking around your yard, go out where you think you might see some dry grass, peel it back, take a look, right? You learn how to do some ID stuff. And, nothing better in a pandemic than staring down the anal slit of a white grub species. Now, crabgrass is a different story. I know we have a lot of reflex action, not so much in sports turf, but certainly in a lot of our grounds operations. A lot of reflex to get out there and put down that pre-emergent crabgrass control. And I'll certainly be talking to the lawn and landscape people about this tomorrow. But just for your information, our Cornell guidelines, our weed control section has this very table in it, looking at the length of control you get from these products. We have plenty of time to get crabgrass products down, especially if one of the things you're going to be doing is overseeding, right? If you're going to be overseeding. Now, of course, all this is out the window if you're in the school districts where, you can't apply materials. So it's important to keep this in mind. You've got some time. There's no rush here. I know everybody's telling you to get it out. But we've got until the soil's really into the mid-50s till the crabgrass gets going. Now, wrapping it up on the sports turf side, something unique to sports turf, I think, is the care of the infield skins in our baseball fields that would normally be getting active use at this time. Well, if it wasn't raining, of course. And so if you're not getting play, really, is this essential? No. If you went out once every couple of weeks and just scratched it up, wouldn't be the worst thing. But you can get to it when you get back. Now you're going to say, well, those plants are going to get big and the roots are going to screw up the clay. And yeah, those things are going to happen. So you better tell people, if I can't come in and keep the vegetation under control, it's going to take me a little bit longer to get this field back ready, right? We have to be prepared to tell the people that we service that there's going to be this lag time when we get out. Now, just like the economy is going to have this bit of a lag before we get going again, everybody's going to need this sort of prep time to get themselves ready. And if we have to sacrifice a little bit of this now and later for the things we're doing now by not doing them, those are decisions that everybody's got to make on a case-by-case basis. So here's what I can tell you. If you let the vegetation grow, it's going to take longer to get it back into shape. But I think that's not a problem if you just communicate to people, listen, this is going to take us a little bit longer. Hey, everybody's clean, everybody's good, everybody's got the antibody. Come on, let's fix the field together. So I think there's things to consider about what's minimum maintenance here. And so with that, Carl, I'll pass it back to you, and you can stare at me at Yankee Stadium, and we can start taking questions.
Yeah, so first question comes from Chris Sitko, of course. And he's got a good question about fields that were trafficked in the fall aggressively. Maybe it was a fall use sport and haven't really recovered. So there's thin areas, and he's thinking about weed recruitment, crabgrass is in the seed bank there. Is that a situation in which you would say, well, we're trying not to promote growth, but in that case, is fertilizer, of course, after April 1st, something you would consider even in a minimal maintenance plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as I understand it, just reflecting it back, it's if I've got a field that got beat up late into the season and hasn't recovered fully, I've got bare ground in the goal mouths, I've got bare ground everywhere. Would helping that field recover be considered part of minimum maintenance? And I think the answer would be yes, to the extent that you're allowed to work a fertilizer application or even seed, right? I think the interim thing would be maybe to seed. If maybe I would mow, expose the soil, and put down maybe 100, instead of the normal seed rate, I'd increase it by 50% and really try to get a flash of density without getting the growth. I guess now that I'm thinking through it, I would say, why not seed first? Because, it's not getting trafficked, and, mow, get the ground exposed, because mowing will also stimulate growth. Mowing will begin to stimulate that lateral growth as well. And I think that's a way to do it and not promote long-term growth, because, once the ground starts to warm naturally, we're going to get that release in, and we're going to be like, holy yes, holy sugar, wait, I don't want this. And I promise you, if you're going to put out any nitrogen, Bill Kreiser said this yesterday, use soluble sources. Don't use a big slug of granule, right? That's going to put 0.7 of a pound down, right? And you're going to get a big urea bump right away, right? That's what these products are designed to do. But that's the reflex action we have to avoid now, because if we can't get back and mow, and I can't bale hay, and I get back there and it's 8 inches, everybody's like, well, why is it 8 inches? Well, I put the fertilizer. Well, why'd you do that? Rossi said not to. Oh, well, so let's think through this, right? Some of you may not have the capacity to put out a liquid application that might allow for lower rates. I know there are some high-grade Anderson products that you can put at lower rates, but, you got to have access to them, have available, and do it right? I like mowing and seeding. I could be wrong about that, but I would say that's where I would start. What do you think, Carl?
I like that. I like that idea. And then a similar question, Ben Polymer, he's asking about PGR usage. And typically he uses those in the summer where he's reducing mowing. He's probably mowing almost every day of the week.
Right.
So, thinking about PGR usage in the spring, maybe you can reflect on what Bill and Doug were talking about yesterday.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so glad to have you, Ben. Glad you joined us. Good luck to all our friends in sports turf in Massachusetts. This is all of us in this together. So here's what I can tell you. Basically, if you looked at Bill Kreiser's, 10 years of studying things, 5 years of the last intensely, right? PGR use is very much got to be governed by the growth rate of the grass. The slower the grass is growing, right, the less PGR you need, both in rate and frequency, right? There's two ways to think about PGR use. I'm glad we're recording this because this could be useful for other people later on. There's two things that are important that Bill's identified, right? Is rate of product and frequency from the PGR end. From the plant end, it's almost entirely about how much clippings you're taking off on a regular basis. What's the growth rate? The more it grows, the more PGR you need, the more frequently you need it, right? The easiest way to get grass to grow faster is to cut it lower and lower. A lot of PGR work has been focused, Ben, on putting green stuff. There's a little bit on sports stuff, but for sure, the putting green stuff where they're cutting at 1/10 of an inch, 7 days, you know what I mean? Those guys are pounding the PGRs. Now, you talk to Bill, you come into the fairway where you just go up to 380 or a ½ inch. You need significantly lower rates, significantly longer intervals, right? And so you have to think about PGR use a little bit differently when you're cutting at a higher height of cut. He further says there's some goofy things like low cut bluegrass. Bill said out loud yesterday, he's not sure they produce gibberellins to any great degree. If you have, low cut bluegrass on some of your finer fields, he hasn't found a PGR that actually regulates the growth of that grass. So that's an outlier to me in some ways. So here's what I tell you, Ben. my experience with these things are both what's been studied and in what we've seen in practice. And Amy Foudy at Michigan State University has been a regular user of proxy on her Kentucky bluegrass field, right? I think there are some products you can use on higher cut turf, bluegrass, ryegrass, tall fescue. All of these products have label recommendations that, to be honest, we don't think a lot about it this time of year, applying it to sports fields, because we want so much growth. So here's the rule. Here's where I'd start, Ben. That's a long way of me saying here's where I'd start. Trimit is by far the most aggressive plant growth regulator. Paclobutrazol, the most effective plant growth regulator you're going to find. There's a lot of these combo products that are on the market. What I would do if I were you is I'd get onto the Greenkeeper app and I'd look at the models. They got over 350 models of the frequency and timing of doing things to regulate grass mowed at different heights. I'm not fluent enough in it to give you specific recommendations, but here's what I can say. I wouldn't use a plant growth regulator in a sports field until I mowed it. Yeah. I'd want to make sure I had some active growth. And then once I got green up, I would consider going in there. And one of the things we will talk about, Ben, moving forward is I can tolerate a little phytotoxicity. I can get 80% reduction in growth before I get phyto, right? In some cases. So you want to be sure to get a mowing down and then start preparing in a week if you can for the beginning of a growth regulator application, depending on how growth goes. But applying it now might not be as effective and might not, I just don't think we need to do it yet. That's at least what everybody's saying yet. But it's a great question if you're allowed to do it.
Yeah, I agree, Frank. And I think a lot of people are trying to weigh the opportunity cost. I think about it as an opportunity cost. If I spray a PGR, am I going to save enough mowings that I can still get the work done? So early in the spring, if before all this grow up and green up, I'm not having to mow much. It doesn't make sense for me to go out there and spray a PGR application, especially when we start thinking about essentiality and what is essential. Someone says, what are you spraying here for? That PGR application probably better saved for when you're actually growing and I can't get in to mow this enough. So just one more question. It's more of a comment about signage on the fields and talking about liability. So staying within county and state guidelines and mandates, have your attorney review and approve, take liability off your shoulders. I mean, this is something, we've never had to think about liability of getting sick from using an athletic field, but that seems like a good idea.
So, Carl, are we able to give Greg a mic? Greg, you got a mic or a camera? We can either see you. So great to have you here. This is exactly the kind of stuff we got to make sure guys at least are able to understand. You take your mic off of mute, Greg, if you got it.
I'll ask him to unmute if he wants to talk. So
yeah, we'll okay. And if not, it's okay. But this is exactly the kind of stuff. Do what you can. If you're in a municipal situation, school district or something like that, by all means, you need to check internally about the regs that are going to be required. And what Greg is talking about here that's so valuable is to post that stuff. Because if you're going to minimal maintenance and they're going to use those fields, you telling them that you're going to minimal maintenance, somehow I'm not a lawyer, but somehow that seems to me like something maybe you want to have checked out by somebody. Yeah. And I think Greg's comment here about, getting it vetted by somebody who knows things about liability is the best advice anybody can give you. And we will be adding that to our best management practices for sports turf managers, especially because the reality is, fellas and gals and fellas and folks and guys and all the different pronouns that I use these days, people are still going to be out there using our fields, especially if they're home. They're doing things they don't normally do, which does two things. They're not familiar with the landscape sometimes that they're walking through. I worry about this on golf courses in particular. They're not used to being out there. And, stupid stuff happens when you're not used to doing things. They go on a field, they step in a hole, they trip a bug. And then, even in an age of pandemic, I'm pretty sure lawyers are working too. So I would want to be really careful about, you want people to use the fields. Gosh darn it, that's what they're there for. But mostly just to keep their distance, wander around, get some fresh air, and go home. Is essentially what everybody's been telling us, especially in New York. Thanks very much, Greg, for those comments. Do you have a mic? You want to talk?
He might not have a mic.
Okay, no problem. All right.
Yeah,
So, Carl, any other questions? How are we doing? We're at a half an hour. We did good.
Yeah, I think we got all the questions.
Can you
So as
hear
we
me?
said, oh, there you go,
Greg,
Greg.
there you are.
Yeah. Hello? Yeah, and I'm getting a lot of.
Yeah, that's not going to work, Greg.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, Greg. Maybe next time.
Yeah, we'll bring you on next time, too.
Yeah, that's
plan
right.
better. If Greg's going to join us in the future. Greg, a longtime NYSTA board member, professional sports turf manager, not well enough recognized sometimes by people across the state. I'm sure in the NYSTA circle, certainly well recognized in the sports turf circles. Just a knowledgeable guy all around at Palatine down there in the Hudson Valley. So that's really good for everybody to consider, Carl. We're at 10:30. What do you want to do?
I think, for this week, we'll wrap it up. That's a good half an hour segment. Got a couple questions in there, really talking about growth a lot this week. And really mowing is what we deem essential. I mean, it's part of the turfgrass definition, right? That it has to be mowed. So thanks everybody for coming this week. Like I said, we'll throw this up on YouTube as a recording. And then we'll be back April 9th with our next discussion. That's Thursday again. It's going to be a 10 a.m. discussion about sports turf.
Thanks a lot. See everybody.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.